interests you the most?
I mean, it's obviously Ohio State, right? They're coming off of such an incredible win. And I think, Marvin Harrison, in the performance that he had this weekend, really started getting that buzz for the Heisman Trophy race. And obviously, we're going to talk about that with J.J. McCarthy, too. But what you saw was the difference one super elite receiver can make in a game like that. So I think it's about Ohio State continuing to build on that momentum and build off of the performance that they had, continue to be an elite defense as well. Should have a big opportunity. Again, we know the injuries that Wisconsin has had, but it's just continuing to make that statement and to win on the road in a challenging environment for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I think it starts with Ryan Day. Very rarely does the head coach at Ohio State get the coach of the year in this conference, right? Because we hold them to a higher standard. Everybody thinks anybody can coach the team. This is going to be Ryan Day's. If he finishes the season the way he started it, this will be his best year coaching. I mean, he's coaching a team that's not as talented as some of the past teams. He's developed this team. He went to South Bend and won, and now he beats Penn State. Specifically to the game, he's also, along with Justin Fry, the offensive line coach, developed an offensive line that's getting better. They're talented. They're still not there. And when you look at the matchup, I think the offensive line of Wisconsin against the offensive line of Ohio State, rather, against the Wisconsin front, the edge really goes to the Ohio State offensive line. But just structurally, the Wisconsin defense isn't really what they want to play. I think they're playing what they played because they inherited this roster.
Yeah, and their defensive front is not the defensive fronts we've seen from Wisconsin in recent years, 200 yards rushing each of the last two games. So that could be a big opportunity for a run game that could use it. Also, hopefully getting a little bit healthier. Maybe Travion Henderson gets back. That's probably where you can see the most growth and could be a tangible step for Ohio State.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the run game's got to get better, and it has. And again, I think this is a good matchup scheme-wise.
Yeah, pretty interesting with Henderson reportedly coming back for this one. I don't want to say you build confidence, but I think just to have a sense of, hey, we can still run the ball.
Yeah.
Because while they relied on it a lot last week, it was not overly successful. It ultimately came down to Marvin Harrison. It's funny, you talk about him, we talk about him in the Heisman race, and we discuss how fast the season has gone, or for some, how fast life has gone. And I mean, you think back to the first week, what was the narrative, right? Why aren't they throwing the ball to Marvin Harrison? 16 targets last week. They threw 35 passes. 16 of them were thrown to Marvin. That again, Ibuka was out. So that's part of it, but that feels like a pretty good ratio.
Well, and it's so impressive, too, that they were able to get the ball to him so much because everyone knows that's who you're going to go to, right? And everyone's number one thing on the plan is to stop and take number 18 out of the game, and yet they're not able to do that. So that is an incredible advantage for Ohio State. And they did all that when they weren't as healthy, as you just mentioned.
How do we feel about Wisconsin? Like, kind of what is their roadmap to making this a good competitive game and figuring out a way to pull it out at the end?
Yeah, probably starts with trying to stop Harrison, right? They target. You mentioned how many times they targeted him. He caught 4 passes on that first drive, right, last week. So that'll be a big struggle for him. They're going to have to probably double cover maybe and rotate to him if they want to play some zone. So, I mean, that's an issue. The quarterback situation at Wisconsin, I mean, that's unfortunate now, although, Braylon did pretty good, I would say, the way he came in as a rookie quarterback. So it's going to have to be, if you look at it as an upset if Wisconsin wins, which I do, Ohio State's going to have to be flat. Wisconsin's going to have to win the turnovers, all the things that make up the anatomy of an upset. Wisconsin is going to need those things.
And they can't play the way that they did for the first 3 quarters last week, right? They need to be like they were in the fourth quarter, where we did learn a lot about Braden Locke and the way that this offense could come back and fight in a game. I think, too, you're going to have to limit the other players. Like, if Marvin Harrison's going to get his, Cade Stover can't beat you. You can't have some of those other weapons that Ohio State have big games.
Yeah, they can't be explosive. If Ohio State gets explosive on offense against Wisconsin, with a young quarterback and with the way they're playing offense, it'd be tough to keep pace with them. That's the issue.
And the issue also for Wisconsin has been for them to win, and we've talked about this some this week, they need to run the ball effectively. It's just not easy to do against Ohio State, and that is a really good defense. And so then you talk about Braden Locke, and I know you and Urban are going to dive into last couple of drives and how well he did in Urban analysis, but still, this is a really good pass defense from Ohio State. It's just a good defense.
Yeah, it'll be an upset. I mean, things are going to have to go somewhat Wisconsin's way.
Let's say this, though. Camp Randall This is typically a very close game. 5 of the last 6 times they played there, it's been decided by single digits. The time it wasn't, it was because Wisconsin won by double digits against an Ohio State team that was number 1 in the country. So not unprecedented for sure. What about Penn State here, Jerry? There's been some hand-wringing, certainly, in State College about how things went down against Ohio State. And I don't want to say piling on, but I think some kind of questioning of where Penn State is. But we've talked all week about, hey, they still have opportunities in front of them, most notably the game against Michigan. And so now you try to pick up the pieces and you try to focus on what you're good at. And you got a game against Indiana who's really struggling. How do you kind of get refocused for Penn State and realize this season is far from done?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. If you look at the Indiana game, you don't spend a lot of time thinking about Indiana. You got to get your team back, right? Because the narrative right now is you can't win the big one. Everybody on the team, everybody on the program has to get back on James Franklin's boat, and they've got to be believers again. So if they weren't playing Indiana, to me it wouldn't matter. But then you go 2 weeks in advance and you look at the Michigan game. So my thought coming out of Ohio State, skipping Indiana, going to Michigan is, I don't hear people saying Penn State doesn't have talent. I don't hear people saying that the schemes aren't any good. They're certainly good on defense, and they're playing with a young quarterback. And so to me, is it the approach? Is it this unrivaled thing? Is it that every game's the same? Is it the process? The process is great when you're better than everybody else, but when you might have to get a little higher to play the best teams on your schedule, there is some emotion to the game. So I would say if it's Indiana, and then next week it's going to be Michigan.
It's Maryland, then Michigan.
Then Michigan.
Yeah.
That's where I go. Has the Penn State approach not worked versus the big teams? Because I think they have the talent and I think they have the scheme.
Well, and then coming out of this game in particular, and to your point about all the questions that it's raised, is how do you get your confidence back? How do you have faith in what the offense can do, even though it wasn't explosive prior to the Ohio State game? It was working. They were winning. They weren't making mistakes. So how do you make sure that Ohio State doesn't beat you twice? And how does Drew Aller have that confidence in the offense? We also heard from James Franklin this week talking about the need to have explosive plays. And here's where Indiana can actually help you, because they're last in the Big Ten in giving up plays of 40 yards or more. That's the kind of play that Penn State could really use.
I know, but this is what we said about UMass. They were last in the nation in plays allowed of 20 yards or more. They got to try it at some point, though. No, I understand. I made the exact same point, and I looked at Indiana, and we've watched them. They're bottom 3 in the Big Ten in basically every meaningful defensive statistic. And yet at a certain point, we sat here a week ago and said, well, maybe this is okay for Penn State because they're still leading the Big Ten in scoring, and maybe this is just the way they're going to beat people with the short, effective passing game, and you don't have to be explosive in the run game, and you have a good enough offensive line. So I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me they're going to become explosive. Now, maybe they do.
Well, the part of this is right, with the run game, we just haven't seen them break off the long runs in the way that they did last year with the same running backs. But the pass game, Jerry, this is something that they could try to do more of. They're among the worst teams in the country, or last in the country, at trying to throw the deep ball, 15 plus air yards or more. They're really not attempting it. So do you think they'll attempt it more this week, knowing that they didn't have it in their arsenal?
I think the one thing that is hurting them in that regard is they're playing with a young quarterback. And maybe they don't think he's ready. Maybe they can't protect him. He was sacked 4 times against Ohio State. And he that was a lot for a young quarterback in Ohio Stadium. I think you could feel that this is the first time he's been through that kind of game. But again, guys, I go back to the approach. When you watch the Ohio State-Penn State game, it just looked like, to me, Ohio State was playing a big game. Everything pregame, the conversations, this was a big deal for Ryan Day. Ryan Day, he's been through it now, right? He has to win every single game, and yet he had his team emotionally ready to do what they did against Penn State. I think it's about the emotion of the game and the approach to the game.
So I feel like we've been down this road before, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you truly believe that in the facility they don't treat the week any different? I mean, I understand what the Twitter feed says, or the X feed, or whatever we call it. But you don't think they treat it differently when it
I do not.
like that?
I do not. I think it's one of these process programs like Alabama playing East Carolina and
Yeah.
all these non-conference games that Alabama plays. I think coaches have bought into this 1-0, and I think they have bought into this process because they've seen Alabama win 9 championships, and that's the way Nick does it. Now, Nick probably doesn't talk about the big games either, and it works for him.
Yeah, but that's just because you have better players than everyone else.
I think the process, yeah.
And they've won a lot of those, so you just do what you did that worked in those games before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. Again, I mean, they're not the
I
only
mean, what
ones.
is it then? Is it talent?
It's not
I mean,
talent.
okay, it's not talent. Is it scheme? Is Joseph?
Well, but I mean,
there
okay,
were
so
some
I would argue.
offensive
I'm not
issues
saying.
and-
Look, I think they're a really talented team, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
But like, do they have great talent on the flank this year? I don't think they do. I mean, I don't think it's at the level of where it's been in some previous years. Like, I think you can look at them personnel-wise and certainly explain why they're not making huge plays in the passing game. And then you talked about having a young quarterback who hasn't thrown an interception yet. You have a great defense. And so you're saying, why would we put our defense in a position where they have to defend a short field?
A very good
Because
argument.
It's hard
Yeah.
for people to go
Sure.
the length of the field on us. So we're not going to risk this because we don't have Hamler out there in the flank.
And that's
a
a fair
great
point.
argument.
The
Yeah,
the receiver point, they couldn't get separation.
Right.
They don't. That we saw the difference between an elite receiver and.
I
not
just wish someone had said all this before the game. I mean, I'm serious. I didn't hear anyone predict that Penn State was going to lay an egg on offense.
The part I don't understand is the running backs not breaking big, long runs.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it's because defenses know you can't stretch
Yeah.
them. And
I looked at their stats
right?
today. They're averaging 50 yards a game, and they're averaging 13 carries a game. The two of them. I mean, I took them as if they were one person. They're both averaging 50 yards a game and 12 or 13 carries.
Yeah.
I know, and
It's
Simmons
not,
was-
that's not what we saw last year.
No, it was one of
at
the most
all.
explosive.
Yeah.
6 carries longer than 40 yards
Yeah.
last year.
So there, some of that.
Maybe we had them. Maybe Rev, you make a great point. Maybe we had, or maybe I had them overrated personnel-wise, and that's why I'm looking for another answer. It may very well be that.
Right. All right, well, we'll get some answers against Indiana, and so those answers will start before the matchup even home. Nebraska really banged up. I mean, they're down 3 offensive line starters, taking on a Purdue team that has struggled defensively. We know for Nebraska it's been more about defense than offense, Jerry, and now you're shorthanded offensively. What do you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I want to go to the defense of Nebraska in a second here, but you talk about all the press conferences as we've seen all these guys getting hired at Nebraska to be the head coach. They have 2 more games to win to be bowl eligible. This will be the finish of the press conference game. Okay, they need 2 more wins. Tony White, the defensive coordinator for Nebraska, made an interesting comment earlier in the week. He said, if we don't get our heads straight, Purdue's likely to come in here and rush for 200 yards. And I thought it was a great statement. First of all, he's worried the defense is overconfident now because they have been playing well. Everyone says just what you said, it's a defensive team. And the other thing is, even though Purdue's a pass team, you always have to start your defensive game plan stopping the run. Because if you don't and you let a passing team run the ball, then they really got you on your heels. So I think the Nebraska offense is ugly but safe, and I think the defense is really good, and I think Purdue's going to struggle.
Yeah, I'm with you on the defense. I mean, they have given up very few yards to anyone that's not Michigan. Michigan was able to run the ball on them. But everybody else has really, really struggled. And I think that is something that can travel, that you can have week to week that's going to keep you in these games. They're dead last in the league in turnover margin, and they're 2 games away from bowl eligibility. That is a credit to the defense. And also, we know the very early season turnovers, that has gotten better, but they've also responded better to mistakes, which I think has helped too. But again, you can ride that defense to a bowl, and that's huge for Nebraska, even despite all the injuries, even despite all the offensive inconsistencies.
I was so impressed with the job they did in sudden change situations against Northwestern really early on in that game. And I realized Northwestern's had offensive struggles, but they had really advantageous field position on 3 different occasions in the first quarter. They ended up with 6 points out of it. Nebraska clearly believes in that defense. And then Matt Rule was talking this week, and again, like some of this is personnel stuff, but a long run gets broken into the secondary and Nebraska tracks the guy down, right? Like those are the plays he pointed to in terms of those effort plays, in terms of not giving up on plays. That's going to do it for them because their margin is slim. Look, they're not an explosive offensive team. They kind of are what they are at this point. And on top of that, they've got a lot of injuries. So you're going to have to win low-scoring games. That was what they figured out how to do last week, or have done for much of the year.
You look at them and Rutgers. Both of these coaches have put together schemes that allow them to beat matchup opponents. I mean, that's what it's all about. This isn't going to be good enough for Nebraska in 3 or 4 years, right? If Matt Rule continues to progress. And Greg Schiano, not under the same kind of pressure as the Nebraska coach, but the same thing. You know, Greg Schiano, once he's bowl eligible once and then twice, you know, he can certainly move up. But you have to admire that they're not spread teams. They're not doing what's popular. It might be hurting them in recruiting, but winning helps in recruiting as opposed to losing, obviously. But these two coaches have found a formula to beat a matchup opponent.
And, like, you've got to feel a lot better about the way that they've won some of these games that have been tight or close because of how they lost those games in recent years. And so, again, you're seeing, like, all of these little steps that you got to feel better about that growth, like all the things you're looking for in year one in a new coaching staff.
Yeah. The Illinois game was a great example, right? I mean, the way they came back and just hung in there and matchup opponent.
Yeah, kind of interesting in talking about that Northwestern game, right? That was a one-score game, and like we didn't really talk about it that much.
No, it wasn't even a thing.
Yeah, they won a one-score game. So hats off to the Huskers there. Pretty favorable schedule too here down the stretch. I mean, I don't think you can totally count them out of the West. I really, truly believe that. What about Minnesota? Now, a lot of us counted them out of the West, I think, after they lost to Northwestern, and then they were just thoroughly dominated by Michigan. But again, there's no shame in that. But then you look at their schedule. They got Michigan State coming in this week. Michigan State is in a tough spot. I mean, Minnesota can be a factor in this thing down the stretch. And it's not unreasonable to think they could be in that discussion final week when they take on Wisconsin.
They are right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And certainly we talked a lot about the ending of last week's game, right? But, like, they're right there now.
I know, it's crazy.
They're right there. And, you know, it's just so funny. We spent like a week thinking Iowa was just, we were going to pencil them in. I don't know why we do that ever with the West. We think, you know, at some point in the midseason, somebody's got control of it. Never happens. But this is a team that's going to have a really good chance in this game as well, despite inconsistencies in the past game, because this is another team in Michigan State that's really struggled. And they could make mistakes. They could turn the ball over. And Minnesota's defense can probably control this game. That's where I think, in the run game.
At the end of this weekend, it could be a 4-way tie for the West. This 12-10 win that they won in Kinnick was the best game they've played offensively. I mean, what they've done transition-wise with their offense, between the coaches that they had to replace, you know, Shiraka leaving and the coaches taking over, losing their quarterback, losing Mo, that whole deal. You know, they're in their niche now. I mean, they're just like pushing the ball up the field, nothing exciting. They're throwing the ball on the third step. That one pass that they threw down the sideline, which was a big play in the game, they threw
Jackson,
it 2.5 seconds. I mean, you didn't need an offensive line. I mean, they could have just threw it up that quickly. So they have found their niche offensively. Defensively, it's been a little bit unusual. Usually, they've been strong the whole time. You know, Joe Rossi, I think, has kind of have had to rebuild that defense a little bit. But they have found their niche. You can win the West scoring 12 points in Kinnick Stadium.
This is exactly how you win the West, right? Like all of these teams, who can win these games the most?
It's amazing.
Where are you on Michigan State?
I just think they got it. You know, it's one distraction after another, right? This is the distraction that won't stop. You know, who knows how much they're talking about it in East Lansing. I mean, they're talking about it nationally every week, right? With the distraction with Mel. You know, I think they'll play hard. I mean, they're tough guys, tough kids and all that. But, you know, it's a great game for Minnesota, not such a great game for Michigan State. I think the fact that it's in Minneapolis is big time. PJ and the administration has made that a tough place to play.
Yeah, and the key is, like, and we talk a lot about, like, the way that teams play against Michigan. It may not go that same way against everybody, but you can't turn the ball over early. You can't give up scores early and fall behind. That has just not been, that's been a really challenging way for Michigan State to start games.
And I realize Minnesota did that against Michigan too, but by and large, Minnesota has generally taken care of the ball. Michigan State hasn't. Michigan State's highly penalized. Minnesota isn't. I mean, you just kind of look at things like that. The transfer portal helped Michigan State out this week as Simeon Barrow had one foot out the door reportedly and then decided to come back. He's a big part of their run defense. They've been pretty good against the run. Right, the place where Michigan State's been vulnerable is the pass game, and that's not really a great strength for Minnesota. So getting Barrow back out of the portal this
Yeah.
week perhaps helped them against the Gophers.
And the edge that these West teams have against the bottom half of the East teams, like we're talking about, Minnesota's talking about going to Indy, right? I mean, why not? I mean, all those West teams. And so these crossovers are so important. So when you get a crossover that's struggling, which is Michigan State, they're struggling. It's a bonanza if you're in the West. You want to take all the struggling East guys, you can.
Maryland struggling a little bit in the East after a great start. They have not won a game here in the month of October. Now they're coming off a bye week. They've only played a couple, but still, this is a team that we were talking about. Is this the fourth best team in the league? I'm not saying they're not at this point, but I'm saying it's a less convincing argument than it was before they lost to Illinois. This is a game against Northwestern that on paper they should win, and I would say should probably win fairly handily. What do you want to see from the Terps tomorrow in Evanston?
We thought that about Illinois as well, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's about snapping this skid. It's about getting these two losses out of the way. We felt that, like, you know, that the first loss kind of spiraled into the second. But Maryland needs to go back to doing the things that Maryland does well. And we talked about the improvements they've had defensively. And the pass game, the run game is key, right? We know the records. If they rush the ball for over 110 yards, they're going to win the game. If they don't, they're going to lose the game. So you've got to establish the run, and then you do the pass game. You complement all of that with the defense, and you try not to make mistakes. It's the formula that's worked for Maryland all season long, except for during these two losses. And you need to snap out of it because you still have big games to come here against Penn State and Michigan. We talk about taking that next step for them. That's still in front of them. They still have talent on this team, so they need to get right in this weekend's matchup.
Yeah, talking about taking the next step was why they lost to Illinois. Okay, and so this is another chance to learn how you don't talk about taking the next step when you're not really all that solid with the people that are chasing you. On the field, you've described it, they're really good when they're explosive on offense and when they prevent the big plays on defense. But this mindset that they were better than everybody else except for Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State was the wrong mindset. And if they had that, that's a problem. And if they don't learn from that, it's going to be another problem. So they have Penn State left, right? And they have Michigan left.
Michigan as well.
So they still have those two left, and I would concentrate on all the other teams more than I would concentrate on those two. But that's just me.
They got to get more explosive again, right? I mean,
Again.
kind of going into that Ohio State game, we were talking about their explosion. Now, Ohio State hasn't given up a play longer than 40 yards all year, so I think they had a lot to do with it. But 2 straight games, they haven't had a play longer than 30 yards. They were leading the Big Ten in that category coming in. Northwestern has been sound defensively, really tackled well against Nebraska. That had been a little bit of an issue. You just wonder how Northwestern protects. I mean, the offensive line is I would say an adventure, but a little bit of a misadventure, Jerry.
Yeah, the defense has to keep them in the game, and when they throw the ball, they've got to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly, which I think most people are doing now. There's a lot of teams that are struggling with the pass protection, and one thing you lose in your pass game is the intermediate routes, right? You can do screens, and you can do hit and throws and go deep. So I agree with you about Northwestern's defense. This will be interesting, especially if Maryland comes in and thinks, this is going to be an easy game. We're going to go back with another win.
Well, and that's why you better have learned your lesson.
Hopefully you learned
against
your lesson.
Illinois.
Sounds like Northwestern will be playing with the backup quarterback just based on kind of what we heard this week. Doesn't sound like Ben Bryant is ready. Again, we'll find out tomorrow. Early game here on the Big Ten Network. Again, Big Ten tailgate getting the day. Look at those last couple drives and the performance of Locke. They're obviously going to need him to be really good here down the stretch. They're 5-2. They're atop the West. They're not necessarily overwhelming people, but here they are. How would you guys assess Wisconsin to this point?
I think they're resilient for sure. The Ches Malusi injury, the Tanner Mordecai injury, and they are figuring out ways to win these games. That comeback, we talked about this a little bit on Monday. The belief, the effort, not giving up on the game, I thought that was really, really impressive. And that's what you want, right? You want guys that are fighting for you and fighting for you to come back in a game like that, 18 points unanswered. And also, I love that the game-winning play went to an offensive lineman. Like that.
This is right up your alley.
It is right up my alley, but it's
Named
also
Rucci. I mean, not that would mean anything to most people, but
it's also like it's a nod to we love our offensive linemen
we
in
do
Wisconsin.
love them. We love them dearly. I think this team reflects fixed personality. That's what I think, and he's constantly motivating them. I've loved the clips in the team meeting rooms and some of that stuff. Talk about Locke. Doesn't run like Mordecai. I mean, that's the knock against him, but he doesn't really have to. All he has to do is put the ball in the backs, ride him into the line of scrimmage, and once in a while keep it. I mean, just to freeze the linebackers. You know, he doesn't have to be Thomas Lott of Oklahoma. He doesn't have to be running up and down the field, but he has to threaten the defense.
That's before Nicole's time.
Yeah,
I didn't want to say anything. I'll let him say it.
he just has to threaten the defense with the mesh. That's all.
We're going to go in depth on the Barry Switzer, maybe even some Bud Wilkinson talk a little bit later in the show. I really think a lot about that drive. I've thought a lot about it this week and that fourth quarter. I mean, you think about where they'd be had they not won that game, right? I mean, you'd be staring at the potential of being 500 were you to lose to Ohio State. I'm not necessarily counting them out this weekend, but I'm just saying more likely than not, you would have been 4-4. I still think the schedule's pretty favorable down the stretch here. I still think they would figure out a way to get themselves into a bowl game. But when you're talking about a program that's had the kind of success they've had, 21 straight bowl games, you can't be kind of teetering on bowl eligibility there in year one, particularly when you were considered the favorite, fairly or unfairly, in the preseason.
Right, but after this game, the schedule is favorable.
Very
and
favorable.
Like I said, you could if they lose and everyone else wins that you expect to win, there's a four-way tie for first place in the West. And I believe that Wisconsin's done with their crossovers now, and they may have Rutgers and Indiana left, and Minnesota, whatever it is. And so again, we're in a position where four teams could be in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that's all you really want in year one. Last year with divisions. Also, we talked about that preseason poll. It was kind of like you're just throwing darts, right?
Yeah, no, I would agree.
We weren't sure, and you weren't sure what Wisconsin was going to look like in year one, but certainly that would be great year one.
They were still the favorite. They may have been the favorite by default, but they were still the favorite.
Yes, I think it was a little bit by default.
Yeah.
And in the last year of the West, it would be interesting if whoever came out of that mess went to Indianapolis and won the West and won the championship, one and only time it's ever going to happen.
Only time. The Big Ten West, as we know, has never done that. Great chance that Wisconsin's the team that's there.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, eminently winnable after that game against bowl-eligible teams, undefeated Michigan, Rutgers, and Iowa, all with the week off. Illinois trying to regroup as well. Illini need to win 3 of their last 4 to make it to the postseason. Let's dive into each of those teams as promised. We will start with Michigan. It is an off week. That is not to say it has been an uneventful week in Ann Arbor. As we know, there's a lot going on there. How would you assess where the Wolverines are at this point in the season?
Well, from an on-field standpoint, they're in a great place, right? We have seen them be really dominant on both sides of the ball. We've been talking about J.J. McCarthy as a potential Heisman candidate, and he should be. He's going to have a lot of big opportunities down the stretch. He is so efficient. He's taking care of the ball, coming off a career-high 4-touchdown performance. The question is going to be dealing with the distractions, dealing with everything that is outside of the program. They don't have a game to prepare for this week, so we're going to have to wait another week for them to get back out there against Purdue. And you have to wonder, all this the noise swirling around about whether there be any punishment before we get to the postseason that would probably need to come from the Big Ten, and we don't know if they have interest in doing that. So in the meantime, you just keep preparing, and your toughest games are ahead of you. This is the stretch run of the season that we've been waiting for Michigan to get to, and I'm sure that they can't wait to actually get back on the field and playing games and allowing us to talk about that again.
Yeah, they've had a year full of distractions. I thought those 3 games that Jim Harbaugh wasn't there, I really thought that made a difference. That seemed to me to be their, not sloppiest, but they didn't seem to be into it as much, and they looked like they got a push of emotion when he came back. So as long as he's there, as long as there's no punishment that would prevent him from being there, which I don't think any of us think that that's going to happen, they've handled this distraction since then, right? They appear to be the best team out of the 3 in the East. Of course, Ohio State has the best record, the 2 big wins, right? But we keep saying that Michigan's going to be better. I think the fact that and I've looked at this conversation based on who they have left in the season, the fact that they're coming back against Purdue before they play Penn State and Michigan, I think is really good to give their team a rest. They don't have to put anything new in. they can deal with Purdue the week of the game.
It's also going to be interesting because we're getting our first CFP rankings on Tuesday, so I'll be very interested to see how the committee handles Michigan and Ohio State, right? Because Ohio State could be higher than people think, considering the strength of the resume. Michigan's looked the part, but what does the committee think?
Right. Do you get more credit for beating Notre Dame, for beating Penn State in the way that Ohio State has versus Michigan? Again, they're leading the nation scoring margin. They've been completely dominant, but the question is the schedule, which by and large is out of their control, other than the non-conference portion of it, which we won't dive into despite the fact it's scheduled Friday, because we've got lots more teams to get to. Where are you on Iowa? Coming off the massive disappointment against Minnesota, offensively, you get 12 yards in the second half, and yet you nearly won the game. What do you think of the Hawkeyes as they prepare for their stretch run, very much in this West race?
Yeah, I'm going to go right to the schedule. I'm going to say, okay, what does this coach want to get accomplished as they're off and looking ahead? They play 4 matchup opponents: Northwestern, Rutgers, Illinois, and Nebraska. I wouldn't do anything different. I'd rest, and I'd come out of the bye week healthy. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. The offense isn't going to change. The defense isn't going to change. I'm going to get healthy and rested. I'm going to beat those 4 matchup opponents, and I'm going to go to Indy.
You know what I would love to see? I would love to see Cooper DeJean turn into the way we talk about Travis Hunter at Colorado. Play him all the snaps. Yeah. Put him on offense. So that would be my plea for the off week.
We have talked about that some this week. I mean, he is as dynamic a player as there is in the open field in the country. He played a lot of offense in high school. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but a bye week, it gives you a chance to put some wrinkles in. Rutgers gets a bye week. It is a week to bask in the glow of bowl eligibility.
They should bask. They really should. I mean, the schedule's going to be really challenging down the stretch for the rest of the season, but you've already secured that bowl eligibility. You've taken your step. We heard from Kirk Soraka this week talking about the offensive improvement, the improvement he's seen from Gavin Wimsatt, but says that there's still meat on the bone. So we'll see. They're going to need to step it up in the opponents that they've got in November.
You're a New Jerseyite. Is it Basking Ridge? Isn't that a town?
Basking Ridge,
you could go
yes.
bask in Basking Ridge. Anyway, what do you got on Rutgers? Yeah, okay.
I'm pro-basking with Rutgers, absolutely. Okay, but here's the issue. It's Ohio State, Iowa, Penn State, and Maryland. Just rest your team, get healthy. Don't let Ohio State distract you, and kind of figure out how can I be my best against Iowa and Maryland out of the last 4.
All right. While you're basking, you do all that kind of stuff.
Pro-basking.
Okay. Then you spend your schedule Friday post-basking.
Pro-basking.
Right. Let's finish up with Illinois. I still think they've been the biggest enigma in the Big Ten. I think they would have been less enigmatic had they figured out a way to hold on against Wisconsin. But now they can only afford to lose one more game if they're going to make it to a bowl.
Yeah, biggest surprise for me, I think, of the season. And they have the matchups. They've got Minnesota, Indiana, Iowa, Northwestern.
Yeah. I mean, it's not out of the question. Again, I know we keep saying it every week, but nothing's out of the question, but it's just not happening.
This, to me, is all about coaching, how Brett Bielema handles this off week. It's not about the players. It's if he makes the right decision during this off week to get ready to beat these matchup opponents.
Well, and you're also coming off such an agonizing loss, the way that you lost in that 4th quarter. So you really need to move past it. You need to move on, because I'm with you. I see a bowl. I see a path to a bowl, but you can't let the way that game ended spill over too much.
And Brett's been around a long time. My guess is at some point in his career, either at Wisconsin or Arkansas, he's been in this position. And a lot of times, if what he did in a similar position worked, he'll do it again.
I cannot for the life of me figure out the offensive line. I think that's the one that we saw him in camp and just thought they'd be really good. They give up more sacks than anyone in the Big Ten.
Yeah, they changed the pass game recently to avoid that. They're hitting, throwing, they're not in that intermediate, they're throwing screens. They're trying to help the offensive line, but I would absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. All right, football tomorrow.